Hello, welcome to the People Profit Podcast, the show where we flip the script on traditional business thinking and prove that when you put people first, profits follow. I'm Sandra Coker, your guide on this journey to more engaged teams, loyal customers, and a healthier bottom line. These episodes are brought to you by Human Power Solutions, helping organizations unlock the human potential that powers performance. Whether you're a leader, an HR pro, or a curious change maker, buckle up. We're diving into fresh stories, real-world strategies, and a few laughs along the way. Ready to turn your workplace into a profit-powered people machine? Let's get started. Welcome to the People Profit Podcast. I'm Sandra Coker, and I'll be your host for today's episode. And of course, I made the mistake of wearing green today. So with a green screen behind me, I'm now transparent. So enjoy this look for today. I won't make that mistake again. Today's episode, we are featuring Markus Braasch, and he owns a company called saltmoney.org. And super fascinating gentleman. I met him through a mastermind that I belong to. That's an international mastermind with just entrepreneurs that are doing different things. And my conversation with Markus when I first met him was about his leadership journey and how he started and where he is today. And Markus will give us a lot of different little nuggets, I'm sure. He talks a lot about the culture add-on, and and we're going to talk about his book, which is the 7 Paths of Passive Income. And I'm really excited to learn more about that. In his book, he talks about the 7 paths to financial freedom. And so, we're really excited to have that conversation with him today. We'll talk about the different mistakes that people make when they're in the leadership journey, how important communication is, constant communication is with your leaders, whether they're in person or hybrid. Really looking forward to this conversation with Markus today. I was reading over your profile and all things during research for this episode, and you've had a really dynamic journey, from co-founding a startup at age 20 to acquiring Salt Money. Can you kind of walk us through the path of that and what shaped you, most as a leader through that journey?
Yeah, I was kind of always a little bit of an entrepreneur. I think even in my teenage years, when I came across the first problem, it was when I was trying to play certain computer games and my computer was not fast enough. I figured out that I needed to upgrade to a more expensive computer. Problem was my parents said no to buying it for me, and I didn't have the funds to buy it myself. So I had a problem to solve, right? And I did something very entrepreneurial. Since my dad is kind of a handyman and he had taught me how to do things with wood, I thought maybe I can try to build a doghouse and sell it on the classifieds. So I did that. I built it all myself with a little bit supervision from my dad. I was about 14 at the time. Put it on the classifieds, sold it. And it was actually pretty easy to sell. And then I did a few more after that. And I was able to buy my computer within a month or so with just doing that. It came naturally to me, I think. And the startup.
That's awesome.
And the startup happened a little later. I was always interested in computer science, and math was somewhat easy in school. So after 10 years of school education, I decided I don't want to do high school or what's comparable to high school in Germany. I would rather want to do an apprenticeship program for 3 years where I work with a company. Mm-hmm. And the company I joined was Hapag-Lloyd to learn IT skills and learn how a business works. So I went through all the different departments of the Hapag-Lloyd container shipping company. And at the end of that education, after 3 years, I started working on staff in a company in a specific role. But the computer system that they wanted me to work with were kind of antiquated and everything was slow. The internet was coming about and there were all these new cool programming languages and new tools. So I felt like I needed to do something that's more cutting edge. So I ventured out on my own first as a freelancer. Yeah. And then after half a year doing that, I co-founded the internet startup with somebody who was a little bit older than me, had more experience.
What did your parents say about you kind of like not doing the school route. I mean, here in the US, it's very, high school, college, all of that. So what's that like? What's that like over in Germany?
My parents were actually supportive of that.
Nice.
Not every parents are like that, but they were also from a background where they didn't go to high school. That had a similar career path. And they were like, if you want to go to university, Marcus, you kind of have to figure out how to pay for it for yourself. But
Yeah.
I was like, it wasn't really attractive to me because school seemed a little boring. I wanted to put things into practice. And the apprenticeship program seemed like a better mix in that area.
I love that because, one of the things I think that I think you're seeing, you've been living over here for many, many, many years, and I think we're seeing that more push. One of my children went to vocational high school, another one went to private school, another one went to public. So every kid has just different needs, and I think they can lead themselves in these different arenas. So I love that. So that was just a little aside there.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about becoming a leader by accident. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What were some of those early leadership lessons that came from those growing pains? And really, talking to our audience who, are either executive leaders, in executive positions, or those just kind of starting out. What were some of the things that you learned?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. Since I became a leader at age 21 approximately, when we hired our first employee, my co-founder was a bit older. He was probably 15, 20 years older than me. Mm-hmm. And he had some more business experience. I covered the technical side of the business. He covered the business aspect and the sales side. But when we hired our first employee, that employee needed both the leadership from the business owner, from one of us, but also needed some technical leadership from my side. And I didn't know a ton, honestly. I had worked in technology about a year. I had not seen a lot of great examples for leaders.
Yeah.
So figuring it out and sometimes making some mistakes. One thing I learned is it's not really good to be passive as a leader. You want to be intentional and kind of set up regular check-ins with the employees to see if there's anything you can help, any things that's blocking them in their progress. And I didn't do any of that. I was like, occasionally I was talking with them when things came about naturally, but like a formal process where you have some basic one-on-ones, like at least once a week in the beginning, and then later maybe once a month. That would be very helpful. I didn't do, but we still made things work. I think my co-founder stepped in sometimes in that area without having the technical background. And we had meetings ad hoc as needed, oftentimes with clients when we're trying to solve a client's problem. And it worked that way. We made sure the clients have a good experience, had the customer focus, and that helped our business grow and be mostly successful.
Yeah, yeah. So, do you think if you had regular meetings or regular one, because we hear it all the time in the business I'm in, I didn't have time to do one-on-one. Like, why do you think that they're, and I'm like, you have to have time for it, right? So why do you think that one-on-ones are so important?
Yeah, I feel like everything that's important that you do in a business, you have to do as a team, because if you just focus on individual contributions, you will never get this kind of mastermind effect from multiple people bringing their best ideas to the table and then doing something together that's better than what the individual could produce. It addresses more angles of the solution or whatever it might be. And I feel like the foundation for this teamwork, for the collaboration, is a relationship. And if we don't have one-on-ones, I feel like they are most important, especially in the beginning. If you start working with somebody new, then there's no solid foundation on the relationship level. So if something challenging happens in the business, the risk for misunderstandings is so much higher. And that's really something you want to avoid. You want to make sure that everyone is enjoying working together. And if there's something challenging, you work it out because you have the strength of the relationship and it can handle the load and move things forward and help.
Yeah, I think not making the time for those one-to-ones, or where you lose employees and you don't retain, and you spend a lot of, like, I would call it hidden money on turnover.
Yeah.
It's just a waste of time, money, resources, all of that. So how long did you guys have your startup, and what was your journey like to getting into Salt Money?
Yeah, we ran the startup together for about 4 years. And we grew it to over 100 business customers, a little over 1.5 million in revenue.
Nice.
And we had, at a peak, we had 15 employees. We acquired one other startup that had gone bankrupt shortly after the $2,000 .com bubble bust. And we're trying to kind of integrate their software into our solutions. And that was interesting. It brought some larger customers to the table, but they were also a little bit hesitant to work with the new company that just had acquired these other ones. So we had to build trust again with customers. Some worked, some was a little hard. But over time, I figured out that my corporation and the directions that my business partner and I were going were quite different. I had become a believer, like in the beginning of founding the company, and I wanted to bring some of my faith-based values into how we run the business and have like a high level of integrity, for example. But my business partner was more on the perspective that most important that the business makes money. We can do things that are necessary, whatever. So there was a little bit of differences there. I didn't know how to address in a good way, and that kind of caused us to navigate in different directions over time. And it resulted in me taking a break from working at the company and studying in the US in 2004 for 2 years. And over the time, I was working a little bit remotely and supporting the business. But after that study was done, I was kind of at a place where we wanted to part separate ways. And I joined a few startups after that to kind of contribute. One startup, for example, needed a CTO, so they hired me and I helped them build a social network called Cross TV. It's basically a Christian version of Facebook. And that was pretty interesting. They already had over 1 million members, and we were trying to scale it with a team of software engineers from India that started with 5. At the height, we had like 12, 14. And those were some interesting challenges on scaling and learning how to be a better leader by being present and building those relationships. I traveled to India twice during the time to kind of build relationships with our team.
So talk about values alignment, because that, you're building a company with someone and you think you know them, and then it sounds like there was a little bit of a misalignment in values. Why is that so important for you personally, and then also for leaders out there to have that?
Yeah. In a business, if you're in a partnership with somebody or any kind of a partnership, really, you sometimes have to make decisions that have quite a bit of impact. Oftentimes they involve people, what people you want to hire, what people you have to let go, potentially, and also sometimes decisions on how to do contracts with partners and all of that. And if the foundation of that, which I would see are the values, are not aligned, then it can be very hard to come to decisions. You'll have to make compromises. And sometimes it's just not possible to do it in a good way. You have to, one person has to give in, the other person has to give in, and then eventually you land in a direction that might not be the best one that you wanted to go. And something like that happened for us. We actually had kind of a bit of a fallout with a supplier of internet connection that we were reselling to a customer. And the way that was handled was really problematic, and I felt like our values were part of that they were not aligned. It's also mostly my problem because I was honestly too passive in that conflict. I let my business partner handle it because it was more like a partnership agreement, but as a 40% business owner, I should have been more involved.
That's interesting too. So these are such good lessons. These are good nuggets for people. You talk about like the healthy team culture is kind of underrated by a lot of leaders. What are some of the simple ways that simple but powerful ways leader can create culture?
One good way I've seen to create culture is to ask for feedback regularly from every employee, and also give the opportunity to share that feedback anonymously, and maybe even make it anonymous by default. I'm currently working as part of a larger organization, Credit Karma, who has a regular feedback mechanism. I think it's every half a year they send out a survey and ask every employee to share their feedback on a lot of different topics. They can rate different topics, but then they can also put in comments, and the leadership is committed to read every single one of those comments, which I think is great.
Yeah.
It's a lot of reading. It probably takes them a few days to get through everything. Some say they have to drink it with a glass of wine or read it with a glass of wine next to it, because some is a little hard to take.
Yeah.
But work through it, and they get a picture of what's happening with the people. So I feel like getting that feedback can really get a pulse on where the culture's at and how do you need to navigate that. Educate, emphasize certain aspects to lead the culture in a healthier way, make sure the values that you have established as a company, they are actually lived out in the day-to-day.
So what if a leader, or someone in a leader, I wouldn't even call it, just someone in a leadership position, doesn't have those kind of soft skills or that kind of understanding? What kind of advice would you give to someone? Like, where would they go to learn or grow or, develop that, right? Because we look at companies and that autocratic style of leadership doesn't really work too well anymore, So it's how do people change their habits? Any books you recommend or anything like that?
Well, I would recommend your book. Okay. I think it's really great on the topic.
That's not what I was going for, but thank you.
No, I think it's a good one. There's a few others that I read that fall into the category, but of course, not everyone learns the same way. Reading a book, not every leader would want to do that. Some people just do audiobooks. These days, I listen to a good amount of audiobooks too. Usually on my way to and from the office, I listen to something that helps me grow as a person, as a leader, or something I'm just interested in. So that could be a good way. One good book I read is called Radical Candor. I think the author is called Kim Scott, if I remember correctly. That was pretty good on the balance of being kind to people and understanding, establishing that relationship, but also sometimes being kind is being honest and saying this actually is not going to work out long term unless we change something here, and that really can help a person, right? So, but how do you do that in a way that the person doesn't feel attacked and gets defensive? So there was good learnings in that. A lot of other topics covered.
Yeah, that's a great one, because people have a hard time having like those difficult conversations, and they don't sometimes know how to approach them. So one of the core values things that you've talked about, and is hiring people that you can learn from. I think that's a very interesting thing, because lots of people who are in leadership positions hire people that may not know as much as they think they know, and because they want to kind of like have that authority and that power. I'm not a big believer in that. I'm a believer in like, hey, you're better at that than I am. Can you help me? Right. That's kind of like how I hire. How do you recognize that quality from an interview? Like, that, or early in the working relationship?
Yeah. The majority of interviews I've done were on the technical side. We do something called a coding interview there, where you talk with a person, know them, and then they write a little bit of code to solve a problem. And what I'm looking for in those kinds of interviews, or any other kinds of interviews, if it's more of a soft skill check as well, I'm trying to find out what are the things that I can learn from this person. And specifically, I try to ask questions where determined in the area where I want them to provide value on the team and kind of help the team grow. How can they contribute and lift the level of the team ideally? sometimes we're hiring junior roles where you cannot always expect that, but then you're still looking for some new perspective that new team member will bring in, or some kind of passion that could kind of help the overall team culture. A lot of companies and leaders say they are looking for a culture fit when they're hiring, but I think a better way to put it is to look for a culture add. How can you kind of upgrade your culture a little bit and have the new team member contribute something where your company is actually better afterwards, and it moves the whole vision forward.
That culture add that's great. And that's like a little nugget of gold in there. Because you don't, hire people that are exactly like you or like, everyone else in your team. You're right. You don't innovate, you don't get new ideas, and it's everyone just kind of goes along and does the same, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. And you talked earlier about India. Yeah. And having remote teams across these continents. What have you found to be the key to connection and trust? Obviously you went over there twice, but what's the key to building that long-term trust in these virtual settings for leaders?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like the in-person meetings help with that kind of relationships. It's not always possible, especially in the beginning when you start out a relationship. And we didn't have it in the beginning either. We started with 1 or 2 employees that were remote, and then later on we scaled the team. And we figured out that over time that there were some team members who were really good self-starters. You give them a task, they figure it out, they learn things that they need to learn in order to solve it, and you get a great result. But some other team members, they need a little bit of help, and they might get the instructions, but then they get stuck somewhere and they don't come back to you and tell you that and tell you how they need help. So if you have that closer connection, you're there in person and you figure out that they're stuck and then help them through it, that can lead to a breakthrough. Mm-hmm. And we try to fix that remotely by making sure there are other more experienced team members who can help these younger ones kind of overcome these issues, check in on them, and also figure out some kind of accountability mechanisms remote where they kind of did a little bit of reporting sometimes, especially the ones that were newer on the team, like some end of the week reporting. Yep. What were some blockers, and those kinds of mechanisms can help. We have things called stand-up in the tech industry, where you have it every other day, sometimes even daily on specific phases, and then you just check in with everyone. And if there's any questions they have a chance to ask them, or if it's anything that's slowing them down, blocking them, they're specifically asked to bring it to the table. And there's no condemnation. It's okay to say, hey, I don't know how to do this. Right. You're not being looked down on. It's actually great that you ask a question, because then everybody can learn. Others may have the same question. They just were afraid to ask.
Yeah, I love that. So it sounds like, just like with the in-person, those one-to-ones, it's that constant kind of like getting together and that communication to make sure that they feel included. Because there's a lot of, that digital isolation can be very challenging, in workforce.
Running a business is hard. Developing your people shouldn't be. At Human Power Solutions, we act as your outsourced chief learning officer, designing custom learning and development experiences that actually move the needle. No fluff, no cookie cutter workshops, just results. Whether your people need better communication, stronger leadership, or less burnout, we provide strategic solutions that align with your goals and keep your team moving forward. Visit hpowersolutions.com and unlock your team's full potential without disrupting operations.
I want to pivot a little bit. Well, I actually hate that word. I want to move on a little bit to AI. So, you're an AI architect, right? Mm-hmm. I really love AI. If I could marry it, I would. But I'm already married. I can't do that. My producer's cracking. Right. What excites you most about AI, and how is transforming leadership in the workplace? So there's so many people, especially my age. I'm a Gen Xer, and a lot of people are like, I don't want to use that. It's it's a game changer, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that one of the most unique opportunities we have with AI right now is learning how to ask better questions. Because if you are in a conversation with like a large language model that's really smart, has access to all this data, you can basically ask any questions you can think of, and you get a pretty decent answer. And you can ask it to pretend to be a professional business coach, or even give a name of somebody who's a great author of a book on a topic, and then it will really work hard to give the help that somebody who has written the book would have given you. And those scenarios, they just didn't exist 10 years ago, even five years ago. And people had to pay a lot of money to get a similar amount of feedback. I personally have a lot of conversations to think through financial strategies, even tax planning. I do some investing both in the US and also in Germany. So there are some international tax filing complications that it's hard to find a professional that can help you with those different angles. But language model, no problem, right? There's content on the internet about any topic, and it can mix it together and help you find solutions. So you have to still check, because there can be hallucinations, but it gives you at least the right pointers.
So how do you think it's transforming leadership? Like, what do you think it's doing for the eye? I'll tell you go ahead, you go ahead.
Yeah. The way leadership is transformed, I feel like leaders, if they're smart, they're learning how to work together with AI and encourage team members to do the same. A lot of people are afraid that AI might take over their work or their job, make things obsolete. And maybe eventually it will do that in some shape or form, but that's still a long ways off in most professions. And also, even if it does, there will be new opportunities that will open up that we can step into, because things are now easier to accomplish. So I feel like a leader in AI, it's important to address this fear that people have and have a good solution for it. And give people the tools that they can use AI beneficially, but also make sure they're not getting into, for example, legal problems by using an AI tool that uses content that's copyrighted, or it causes branding issues and other compliance challenges that may have to be covered.
One of the things I use it for, so my marketing company built a bot for our company, put our brand guide in it, put our philosophy, all of our, just built our bot. And I'm not super eloquent with writing emails, because I write like I speak, which, as you see, I'm just very casual. So I often will write an email, copy and paste it, and put it in that bot and say, can you clean that up for me a little bit? And it's amazing. It's my brand, it's my tone. And I think for some leaders, it can be difficult to have the right, to send the right kind of email, because everything digitally can be so offensive these days. What are your thoughts on kind of utilizing it to help to create a better culture as well, digital culture?
Yeah, I think there's a big opportunity there. And it can also give you angles of how somebody could read the message that you're going to send that you have not thought about, and then help you rephrase it so it's harder to misunderstand what you're trying to communicate, for example, right?
Yeah.
So those kinds of pieces of feedback, if you give it a good, what's called a prompt, a good instruction set in the beginning before you paste the message, then you can get really useful results from these AI tools. It's really up to how are we using them. And if we are stuck in some area, are we asking for help to make sure we can overcome that and still make progress with some AI tools?
Yeah, that's awesome. So you mentioned people who learn to work effectively with AI, that prompting, really giving it that really good prompt. They have a real edge, So what skills or mindsets, or where can people go to help them build that edge?
Yeah, one thing that I would recommend is to not just use one AI tool, but try a few of them and figure out what the strengths are for certain types of problems that you want to solve. In my space, for example, I use ChatGPT. I use things from Google, like Gemini tools, both the text-based tools, the image generation tools. I might play around with some video generation tools soon. I also use the Grok 3 from XAI. I feel like that's pretty good. It has a very good system in the background, and sometimes it's a little bit too verbose, so occasionally I have to tell it to be brief and much to read because my time is limited, right?
Yeah.
But you learn these things, how you have to use the tools to get the most value out of them. And then, if you have a specific kind of problem, what do you need to use? When I want to write some code and I want the tool to write the code with me or write a test case for the code, then I have to use a completely different tool or maybe a different model to get the quality result I'm looking for.
All of that. That's awesome. How do you think leaders can help their employees reduce the fear and the resistance, from their team for their teams in using AI?
I think transparency can help here. If they transparently share how they're using AI, how they find it useful, and also some areas where they struggle with it, or maybe where they're frustrated because they're not getting a result they're getting out of it. Or in the financial space, for example, there's the problem. If you ask for specific things in the financial area and the language model doesn't have access to the data to give you the right answer, it will just make things up.
Okay.
And that can be very detrimental in the financial space, right? So that's a frustration that people have. And that's one of the reasons why we don't see a lot of financial advice bots, because if you put one of those out there and it gives some kind of advice that causes somebody to make a very expensive mistake, then might be a lawsuit trying to come your way, and you don't want to have those, right?
Yeah, for sure. I know I hear all the time those commercials for trading, plug in our app for trading. I'm like, why would anyone do that? Like that.
You have to give a lot of trust to the AI to kind of put your money into the control of it. And I feel like that's really investing, and you don't want to invest in something that you don't understand.
Yeah.
If you're doing something like that, you have to work with somebody who understands deeply how that actually works.
Yeah.
That you trust, or you develop that understanding yourself so you feel comfortable to put your money on the line for it. I personally don't use a lot of AI tools for investing currently.
Yeah. No.
Prefer to understand what is happening. Maybe in the future, well, I don't know. I've built investing algorithms myself that are not fully AI driven. They may have some AI components, but it's mostly if then,
Right. Yeah.
Leaders make a decision.
Yeah. That's crazy. I want to talk about your book, but I want to kind of wrap up my leadership question. I definitely want to get to your book and insult money. You want to talk a little bit about that, but just for the listeners, for those guys listening that are in the leadership mindset or moving into that position, or middle management kind of thing, what's one mistake that you've seen over your career leaders make again and again, and how would you encourage them to think differently?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like sometimes assuming things without fully understanding what the foundation of a decision is can lead to expensive mistakes, and can also lead to disappointments in employees. I've seen leaders, sometimes I've made the mistake myself where I made a decision that affected the team, and I did not really ask the best people for perspective, advice for their piece of puzzle before I made the mistake, and I made a suboptimal decision. It may have been something that we can recover from. In most cases it was, but we could have done so much better as a team if I had gathered more feedback and make sure we're not missing out on important pieces of the puzzle before we move forward. One example is when initially in the first company that I co-founded, we hired one engineer that actually had gone to college, and he was better in computer science in some areas than I was as a result, because I didn't have a computer science degree. I knew how to program from reading books and putting it into action, basically. Yeah. So I I could have gone to him more and asked him for feedback on some of my code, how to make it better and more testable, and would have led to better solutions. I was still able to solve problems, but having a solution that stands the test of time, it's also very valuable.
So like, kind of goes back to your point of learning, like being able to hire people that know a little bit more than you, right? But as a new leader, do you feel like you were, was it that you didn't want to let him know that you didn't know how much he knew? Or, just these newer leaders sometimes feel like if I make a mistake, if I can't make a decision, if I don't know how to do this, then I'm going to be looked upon negatively. What was your thought process?
Yeah, I think it was a mixture of things. And maybe I was a little bit concerned that he might look down on me as a business owner if I ask him for help in this area, which now I know that's actually considered strength if you do that. But back then I didn't have that healthy perspective.
Right. Yeah.
And another factor is that he also sometimes had a little bit of an attitude where he said things in a way that, were easy to take the wrong way, because he could have said it in a nicer way. And that bothered me a little bit. So caused me not to be too open to seeking for help from him. But I should have looked past that and still let him use his strength and help the company make progress.
It's so interesting because the personalities in companies, when you do these behavior assessments or the working genius assessments or whatever, whatever it is that you do, it's the communication styles of people are so different. And I think sometimes when you're newer to leadership, or you're just kind of rolling into this as your first role, or you've been doing the same thing and the world has changed, like our work environment has changed completely since when we were growing up. And I think people need to understand that people do communicate differently, and it's not a personal attack on them. It's just how these people, happen to deliver information. And that's one of those skills I think it is a hard one, because we're really sensitive to how people feel about us. So you talk about like, what does like treating people well look like day to day, in a company, beyond just being nice, right? What do you feel that would, that looks like?
Yeah, I think a key ingredient is to be approachable. And sometimes it can help to be proactive. If you know somebody is working on something and they haven't talked with you in a while, why not just check in and see if there's anything you can help with? Another solution I found is whenever there's an opportunity to be in a group setting and we can talk about things, just be very approachable. If somebody brings up a question, be really helpful, thank them for bringing it up, and kind of promote this, asking for help at a group level. I feel like that can really shift things and unlock progress for the team.
I love that. It's great. Such great advice. I'm so excited for our listeners to hear what you have to say. But I do want to move on to, you wrote a book.
Yeah,
It's
I did.
exciting.
Last year, mostly wrote it, edited the book several rounds, and then at the end, I decided to hire a professional editor and publish it. And it's basically a summary of the different ways that I discovered in the beginning by accident and later more intentionally how to create a passive income. So we can over time make our job optional, which I feel like it's something that can really lift a burden off of people's shoulders. I have a high value for freedom, and financial freedom is something that really helps people.
What's the book called?
The book is called Passive Income Fast Track.
Okay, nice. Passive
And it covers the 7 paths to financial freedom. And those are 7 paths that I used myself in the past.
So what inspires you to write it? Because taking on writing a book it's a daunting task. It's not something that, lots of people say, I want to write a book. But then they think about what it entails. So, when you decided to, what was that inspiration to be like, I'm doing this?
Yeah. So the main inspiration for me was thinking about the version of me 15 years ago that was kind of either not caring about financial topics or struggling to figure things out, making a lot of mistakes. So I wanted to serve that kind of person that does not have the financial education that I have today and help them invest in ways that are smart risk as well. It's kind of hard to invest with zero risk, but we can be very smart.
Yeah.
Investment. Like if I just buy some meme stocks because they're trending on social media, I might catch it close to the top and then it drops right after that and I lose 50% or more of my investment. That would be a very bad idea, right? But there are some smart ways to take calculated risk where you invest for the long term and you find valuable companies to invest, for example, and then you have a really good outcome. But how do you learn those skills? Most children don't receive financial education either from their parents or in the schools. So where do they find? Just learning by mistake is not a great way, right?
Yeah, definitely not. It's funny because it's like one of the skill sets that everybody needs, and it doesn't make any sense that in a lot of school systems. So the workplace today is really uncertain. I mean, we are sitting in this really crazy time right now. How do you see the principles in this book helping people navigate this uncertainty in today's world?
I think it's a great opportunity to diversify a little bit and not just rely on the income from the main job or main business, main profession that people might have today. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go so hard into the passive income area that it completely replaces your income in a year, but you can start building something, be very strategic about it, and be on track to be completely financial independent within 2 to 5 years. 2 to 3 years is really possible, but it sometimes requires a little bit of life changes that people don't always want to make. So just having a reasonable time frame for making these shifts, and then if something happens to the economy, we get laid off, then it doesn't hurt as much because we have more runway to kind of cover it through a passive income, maybe fully replace it. The job has already been optional. We are only working to make a contribution to society, which I figured a lot of people actually do today. They have already earned so much in leadership that they could retire early right now, but they decide to keep working because they like helping people. And that's something I didn't even know as a young person. I thought everyone's still there because they need the money, but that's not true.
Yeah.
And it's actually great that that's not true.
That's a really hopeful thought for the listeners here. And for those listeners are thinking, just too busy. I'm working full time. I really don't understand this whole passive income thing. And, so I'm just not going to think about it because there's just too much going on, right? What's the mindset shift you would encourage them to explore?
I would encourage them to invest in their financial education in smart, creative ways. Figure out what aspect are they curious about. And in my book, I cover 7 different areas of building passive income intentionally, because I know if somebody starts out in the journey, they may not know if real estate is the best path for them, or if stock investments is the best path for them, or creating some digital products, whatever it might be. It's good to ask yourself some of those questions, and in some cases, maybe take a few steps on one of those paths and see if you still like it after you learn more about it. And if not, no problem. You learned something. Maybe you made all failures, but now you can take those learnings, apply them in the other area that you're also interested in and curious about. And then that might be the one where you can really make an impact and improve your passive income flows.
That I love. Such a great conversation. What's one message? Actually, wait, one thing. Tell me about Salt Money.
Yeah, so Salt Money is part of what inspired me to write the book, because I had always enjoyed writing in the past. When I was studying in the US in 2004 to 2006, for example, I started a newsletter. Actually, I wrote a weekly message to first friends, and then it grew a little bit to other people who found it on the internet. And I enjoyed doing that. I enjoyed serving people that way. But then after I moved back to Europe, I kind of stopped doing it. And Salt Money was kind of my way to get back into writing. because it was a website that already had a lot of content. It was available for sale on the internet. I found it on a platform called Flipper. And since I wanted to help people in the financial space and it had a lot of financial content, it was like in great alignment with the steps I wanted to take. And it encouraged me to post regularly, start writing newsletters again. And then a lot of those messages, those articles, I was actually able to transform a little bit and let them be a chapter in the book. So it really helped me on that journey.
Oh, that's awesome. That's so awesome. So what's one message, one or two, because you've got a lot of little nuggets in this conversation. What are two messages you hope that the listeners, take away from our conversation today?
Yeah, I feel like in today's time, it's really important not to lose hope. And if something is happening that is challenging in your life, try to find people in your vicinity that still seem hopeful and ask them why they are hopeful and why they are happy or excited. And maybe see if you can shift your perspective a little bit. And if you are getting a lot of your perspectives from social media, try to find those influencers that have positive messages, that are building you up, that are encouraging you and motivating you to take steps and learn some new skills or, try some new things so you can actually grow personally. I think that's really life-changing. So I would recommend everyone.
And if you're positive and you're in a leadership position, that's going to come through, in spades for that. How can people connect with you and learn more about Salt Money and your work?
Yeah, they can go to saltmoney.org if they want. And also we have the social media handle saltmoney.org, one word, that works on all major social media platforms. You're welcome to look us up there, follow us, and send us messages, and we can connect from there.
I love that. And we'll make sure we put a link to your book in the comments below so people can go and check out the book. And you can get it on Amazon, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
That's available as an audiobook.
Oh, that's even better.
Yeah. I actually used a little bit of AI to produce the audiobook because I uploaded a sample of my voice and then had the AI generate the version of the audiobook. So it led to a little bit of a British accent, but it's still mostly my voice. So I was happy with it.
Well, I'm going to have to talk with you about that later on.
Yeah, I can tell.
Well, that's great. One last question I have for you. If someone listening today wants to become a better leader or future-proof their career, what's the very first step you think that they should take?
I think they should consider finding a coach. It can be a friend if they don't want to invest in a professional coach that is a little bit further along the line than what they are in the leadership role. But I think having somebody you can bounce ideas off of and learn from that's a little further ahead than where you want to go is really beneficial.
I would totally agree with that. Markus, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time and your perspective and all those little nuggets that you gave to our audience today. I wish you success, Brooke, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again. I think I'll see you again in June.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you so much for asking great questions.
Thank you so much. You have a great day.
Thank you.
That's a wrap on this episode of the People Profit Podcast. If you found a nugget of wisdom or even just a spark of inspiration, share the love, subscribe, leave us a review, and pass the episode along to a colleague who's ready to build a people-first culture. Big thanks to our sponsor, Human Power Solutions, for championing workplace where humans thrive and profits rise. Want to learn how they can energize your team? Head over to hpowersolutions.com to get started. I'm Sandra Coker, reminding you that when you invest in people, you invest in profit. See you next time.